Welcome to the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie Betts. After learning a ton about kidney stones and helping people prevent stones at the University of Chicago, I was fed up with all the terrible advice people were finding online. So I decided to do something about it. The Kidney Dietitian was born. This podcast is for people who want to learn what actually works to prevent kidney stones and still enjoy life, eating, and their favorite foods. Let's dive in. Welcome to the 11th episode of the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie Betts. And today we have a wonderful question from a podcast listener. I think this question will probably help a lot of you out there. So let's go ahead and listen to that question.
Because I have to drink so much water due to my one-time kidney stones, I find myself awaking 2 or 3 times in the night to urinate. What can I do to alleviate this?
Thank you again so much for that question. I really do think that this will help a lot of people out there because going to the bathroom at night is something that comes up a lot when I'm working with my students in my course, and it's just really, really annoying, right? As someone who really appreciates their sleep and who actually has struggled with sleep much of their life, I can definitely appreciate this question and how much not being able to sleep can really impact your quality of life. So first, I just wanted to say how important sleep really is. Sleep is a imperative, like non-negotiable part of health overall. It's so important for both your mental health and also physical health. I think if anyone has been through periods of time when they haven't slept well, certainly you can see how it impacts mental health almost immediately, right? You feel probably maybe a little bit more sensitive than you might otherwise be. It's even linked with things like depression and really severe mental health problems. And so sleep is, I think, pretty obviously associated with mental health, but also it's been associated with higher risk of chronic disease. It's been associated with hypertension and diabetes, and honestly, most of the chronic diseases out there have been associated with poor sleep. And whether poor sleep causes those things or whether those things can make it more difficult to sleep is a debate for another time. But either way, we know that sleep is so important for truly our whole body health. So I certainly don't want anyone out there just chugging water all day and just kind of dealing with not being able to sleep and getting up to and getting up multiple times a night to go to the bathroom, because it really is very important that you are getting that sleep. And so if you are struggling with nocturia, which is the fancy word for going to the bathroom during the night, here's just a couple tips that I have for you to help you deal with it and hopefully make that a little bit better. So the first thing I would want to make sure is that you're not sort of overdoing water. I think, many of us are not drinking enough, but many people with kidney stones, when you hear that drinking water can prevent stones, might kind of go overboard. And technically, you can't really drink too much water. Yes, technically you can, and you can get issues such as low blood sodium, but you have to drink a lot of water for those types of issues to come up. And certainly, drinking as much water as you can is great from a kidney stone perspective, but we do have to kind of balance this sleep issue with getting enough water, right? So as I say all the time, technically the recommendation for all people with kidney stones is to drink enough to produce 2.5 liters of urine output per day. So for most of us, that means we want to drink around 3 liters of total fluid per day. And this does include all fluids, not just water. And, we lose some of that fluid through things like feces and sweating and speaking and breathing and those types of things. So if you're drinking around 3 liters, which is about 100 ounces of water per day, that's probably enough to produce that 2.5 liters of urine output. So that is what's in the guidelines. I will say that for people that I work with, I try really hard to hit 3 liters of output, just because, again, more the better. And I find that 3 liters is really doable for most people of urine output, and that helps us lower those urine supersaturations of all of the different types of kidney stones even more. But if you are producing, 4, 5, 6, 7 liters of urine output per day, then maybe you don't need to be drinking that much water. Again, we have to balance this quality of life versus stone prevention digestion efforts, right? And it's very likely, especially if you're producing 4+ liters of urine output per day, maybe it's not doing that much more for you. You've kind of already reached that threshold. And maybe there's other things in your 24-hour urine test that we could sort of target to help lower that risk of stone. So certainly do not take this and say, Melanie told me to drink less water. Certainly check with your doctor with whatever you do to make sure that makes sense for you. But if you are producing extremely high urine volume and it is impacting your quality of life, I think that it would make sense to maybe back off a little bit from that water just so you can get some sleep. Another thing to consider is maybe cutting back the rate of your drinking a couple hours before you go to bed, maybe 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed. This isn't ideal because, as you know, I say many times that we really want that water intake to be sort of consistent throughout the day. We want your urine to be as unsaturated and thinned out, unconcentrated as much as possible throughout the whole day. And this actually may be especially concerning since our urine tends to be more concentrated at night, just because we're obviously not drinking when we are sleeping, and also some other hormones and that type of thing. However, if you are getting up 3+ times during the night to urinate, and nothing else is really working, then cutting back or slowing down on how much water you drink those few hours before you go to bed can obviously be helpful for a lot of people. Another thing that might be helpful, and I'm sort of grasping at straws here, but something to consider is that, so when you eat sodium, especially, that can make you produce more urine. So especially like kind of right after you consume that sodium. And so this isn't proven in research, but it does make sense from a biological standpoint or from a physiological standpoint that if you cut back how much sodium you eat, especially at dinner, because oftentimes we talk about a low sodium diet for stones, for many other reasons. But if you specifically pay attention to how much sodium you eat at that dinner meal, then that might help you go to the bathroom less overnight. This may be especially difficult since dinner tends to be the biggest meal of the day, which generally is completely fine. That tale that you have to, have the biggest meal of the day at the beginning of the day is definitely a myth. It's perfectly okay to have a large meal and even honestly okay to eat right before you go to bed. But if you are having problems with going to the bathroom at night, maybe play around with eating a little bit less salt, eating your salt sort of earlier in the day, or most of your salt earlier in the day, and see if that helps you going to the bathroom at night. If it doesn't, please disregard this advice. It's not a big deal, but I have had it help a couple people, and it does make sense from a physiological standpoint. So something you might want to consider is just moving that larger meal or a lot of your sodium to lunch or breakfast, just to keep that sodium away from your nighttime sleep as much as possible. Something else to consider, and this is definitely for people who are just starting out, is that if you are working on increasing your fluid intake, really doing it slowly. So, if you are someone who produces just 1 liter or you drink just 1 liter of water per day and you hear, I have to drink 3 liters, and like the next day you go ahead and start drinking 3 liters because you're super gung-ho and you're super excited to do everything you can to prevent stones, that's wonderful. But that can definitely make this going to the bathroom at night, as well as just going to the bathroom many, many times during the day, more difficult because your bladder just hasn't had time to sort of deal with it, right? Your bladder needs to be trained and needs to kind of get used to that much, much larger fluid intake. And so I often say, when you're starting out, with maybe increasing your fluid intake by around 0.5 liter in increments, right? So if you are drinking 1 liter of water per day, maybe consider drinking 1.5 for a week or two, kind of checking in with yourself. How are you feeling? Do you feel like that's a burden? I feel like for water, usually it takes around that amount of time to get used to drinking that much more water. For diet changes, it usually takes a lot longer. There's actually data that shows that it takes somewhere between 3 to 6 months to make any sort of behavior change stick. So these things are hard. Give yourself some credit and some grace and say, I'm working on a lot of things right now, and making change is hard. So give yourself that week or two to get used to drinking more water and get your bladder used to drinking more water, and then add on another half a liter, right? So you then increase to 2 liters and stick with that for a couple of weeks, and work yourself up to whatever your goal is. That can help a lot of people from both going to the bathroom at night as well as just during the day. And also just kind of getting used to drinking all that fluid, because if it's not your habit, it can be hard to do, right? And I totally hear you on that. So hopefully that helps if you are in that boat. Another thing that you might want to consider is pelvic floor physical therapy. And this is certainly a more extreme recommendation, although not really. If you've ever been to PT, it tends to be a really lovely experience. And pelvic floor PTs can do a ton for you, especially if you find yourself going to the bathroom a ton of times during the day or at night. There might be things that they can do to help you strengthen your pelvic floor, maybe train your bladder. If there's any PTs out there, I apologize. I'm probably not doing it justice, but I'm not a PT, full disclaimer. But I really do think, and I've had people work with pelvic floor PTs who find themselves going to the bathroom over and over again, and find that they do have very useful tips and exercises for you to do to make that situation better. Especially if you find yourself going to the bathroom more than like every 2 hours during the day, and this continues, right? If you just increase your fluid intake, kind of see where it levels out. But if this has been going on for a while, I think it certainly would be worth reaching out and seeing if you can work with a pelvic floor physical therapist to see if there's anything that you can do. Worst case scenario, you go see them and, they say, well, sorry, we can't help you. Then that's fine. But my guess is they do have something that they could do to help you. So I want to give that recommendation as well. And I think ultimately, sort of my final closing thoughts on this is that we really just need to find a balance that works for you, right? Whether you're getting advice from me or from someone online or your doctor, right? You know your body best. You know what's going to make sense for you and your lifestyle. And all of these things are a balance, right? So, we say technically that goal output is 2.5 liters per day, but if you simply cannot make that, if in order for you to reach that 2.5 liter output per day, you are just living in the bathroom, that is no way to live, right? We have to weigh the pros and cons here. And also remember that every little bit more that you drink is good. It's not like if you were producing 1 liter and you only get to 1.5 liters, that's not doing you any good until you reach that 2.5 liters, right? It's a spectrum. Certainly every little bit more that you can drink towards that 2.5 liter output per day goal is gonna do you good. So we have to find a balance that works for you and your sleep schedule, very importantly, and your lifestyle. Again, you know yourself best. Listen to all the advice that you get from educated, credited healthcare professionals, but then do what works for you because you know your body best. So I hope that helps with the going to the bathroom at night issue. I know this is something that happens a lot. I hear a ton about it from people with kidney stones, and hopefully these tips will help you get some better rest because that is so important. Thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to today's episode. For more help with kidney stones, check out my website, www.thekidneydietitian.org. For more personalized help from me, check out my online course, Kidney Stone Nutrition School. I can't wait to help you prevent stones and live your best life. Happy eating and have a wonderful day.